Hey, we've got some Paul McCartney news today.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
So, Paul McCartney is 83 years old right now, and he is suddenly opening up about what has to be the most transformative and honestly the absolute most difficult decade of his entire life.
Oh, you mean the 1970s?
Yeah, exactly, the 1970s. He is stepping back into that era through this brand new Audible original called Man on the Run. And, for anyone listening right now, you have to understand the sheer weight of what it means to willingly return to the absolute darkest chapter of your professional and personal life.
Well, it is so vital to understand what this audio experience actually represents, right? Because, this is not your standard sanitized promotional press junket.
Right, not just some hotel room interview.
Exactly. Where a legendary musician just, mechanically answers the exact same 5 questions they've been answering for 50 years.
Yeah.
This is a 3-hour, incredibly intimate auditory journey straight into his mind. It functions as part of the Words Plus Music series, specifically Volume 42.
And the visual presentation alone tells you exactly what kind of experience you are in for. The cover art features him looking directly through the lens of a vintage camera.
Which is such a striking visual.
Think about how brilliant that metaphor is. For decades, he has been the subject of countless photographs and unauthorized biographies. Other people have constantly framed his life for him.
But with that camera lens pointed right back at you, the listener, the message is clear. He is looking at you and saying, well, here's how I actually saw it.
Yeah, for once, he's the one explicitly framing the narrative.
And that visual metaphor translates perfectly to the audio. It expands heavily on the recent Prime Video documentary of the same name. But utilizing the audio format changes the texture of the storytelling entirely.
Because of the director, right?
Yes. The project is built upon 3 solid years of conversational interviews with director Morgan Neville. And the mechanics of how Neville conducts these are crucial. He designed these sessions not as formal interrogations, but as organic, wandering conversations.
3 years of conversations, that requires an immense amount of trust.
Oh, absolutely. When you let a tape roll for 3 years, you break down the ingrained public relations shields. It allows thoughts to develop naturally with all the hesitations and sighs intact.
Rather than forcing him down some rigid pre-planned structure. And what they end up focusing on so heavily is that infamous retreat to Scotland right after the bitter, acrimonious Beatles breakup in 1970.
It was such a dramatic shift.
We hear these vivid, tactile memories that just ground the whole larger-than-life legend. For instance, he talks about being on this freezing farm and building a baby bed for his daughter Mary entirely out of wooden potato pallets.
Just picture that contrast for a second. Imagine you were in his shoes at that exact moment. A few months prior, you had the entire world at your fingertips, utilizing the most sophisticated recording equipment on the planet at Abbey Road Studios.
And now you are working with dirty, splintered potato pallets.
Exactly. He talks about teaching his kids to read, going through the mundane routines of domesticity, and just living this profoundly quiet existence.
He describes the heavy texture of wanting to completely disappear, which is wild when you consider he was the absolute most famous musician on planet Earth at the time.
You can't just walk away from that level of global visibility without some friction.
Think about it. It's like waking up with a massive emotional hangover after the biggest, loudest party in human history. The Sgt. Pepper days were over, and the dream had ended in lawsuits and total exhaustion.
That emotional hangover analogy is perfect.
Everyone assumes a musical genius just dusts themselves off and effortlessly writes another hit. But how does this audio project change your understanding of his so-called collapse during that time?
Well, the cure for a hangover is usually just time, silence, and isolation. But this project shifts the perspective by showing he didn't just passively recover in Scotland.
He wasn't just waiting around for inspiration to strike him.
No, he actively, painstakingly rebuilt his life and his sound from the ground up. And that rebuilding process is inextricably linked to Linda.
Right, because for decades, the public narrative was often dismissive of her role, treating her as just a spouse who happened to be standing near a microphone.
Completely dismissive. But she wasn't just a convenient career pivot. She was the absolute difference between survival and completely fading away into the Scottish mist.
She was his anchor.
He needed someone to anchor him to reality. There is a remarkably poignant moment in the audio where he talks about a specific painting that helped him process Linda's illness many years later.
Wow, that is a striking detail to include.
It is a profound admission because it shows how deeply intertwined they were, creatively and emotionally, from the very beginning to the very end.
It is the story of two people finding each other at exactly the moment when finding someone was the only possible way forward. Which leads us directly into the massive challenge of what came next, the actual formation of Wings.
Yes, the grueling birth of Wings.
It meant picking up the bass guitar again and starting over from absolute scratch.
And he is incredibly blunt about those early days, describing them in his own words as quite hard work and not very rewarding.
Imagine the ego check required for that.
You have to go through the grinding, humiliating process of building a band dynamic from nothing, playing to small crowds and dealing with horrible acoustics.
Right after having been a key architect of the greatest band in modern history, I have to say I push back entirely on how rock history usually frames this era.
What do you mean?
We have this myth of effortless rock gods, that genius just flows out of him. I always assumed Wings was an effortless continuation of his natural talent. It's crazy to hear him admit it was a miserable grind.
Shatters the illusion entirely.
He went from being the CEO of the universe to running a struggling lemonade stand on the corner. Imagine opening a lemonade stand, but every single customer expects your lemonade to taste like vintage champagne just because of your resume. Why do you think he feels the need to highlight the struggle now?
Because the struggle is the entire point. If you don't acknowledge the grind of the lemonade stand, the eventual success feels unearned. And the absolute climax of this whole agonizing process was recording Band on the Run.
Right, that legendary comeback album.
The mechanics of how that album was made in Lagos are a testament to pure survival.
They traveled to Lagos under terrible circumstances.
Yes, the environment was challenging, but the biggest hurdle was internal. The lineup was completely depleted. Key members quit right before they left. So it was just Paul, Linda, and Denny Lane, forced to rely entirely on raw instinct.
You are in an unfamiliar studio, your band has abandoned you, and the pressure to prove you aren't a washed-up relic is suffocating.
Exactly. And yet, out of that absolute disaster, they produced a masterpiece. And you can see a much larger trend of Wings rehabilitation happening right now across the culture.
He is dedicating serious creative energy to making sure this specific era is finally understood. But, you can't discuss trying to build a new musical family in the 70s without addressing the ghost of the former one.
That shadow is always looming in the background. You were talking about the ultimate rock history friendship, John Lennon.
Exactly. And yes, this audio project yields brand new stories about them, which is almost impossible to believe at this point. For instance, he details their brief reconnection during the mid-70s bread strike.
That story is fascinating. Just imagine New York City during a massive strike where you simply couldn't get bread anywhere.
So what happens? You have the two most famous songwriters of the 20th century, and they are just hanging out, trying to figure out how to bake their own bread together.
It is such a wonderfully mundane, beautifully humanizing image.
But more importantly, it challenges the official narrative that they were bitterly estranged during that entire period.
It forces you to rethink their entire post-breakup dynamic. Why do we always prefer the myth of the angry feud?
Because anger is dramatic.
Right. But the reality is often just two old friends trying to knead dough in a kitchen. The project also includes a breathtaking musical moment, a performance of Yesterday, featuring John's original spoken introduction.
Wait, really? That's incredible.
Yes, it places the most covered song in history right back into the context of the friendship that actually produced it. It reminds you that they were just two guys who loved playing music together.
But the absolute, incredibly heavy centerpiece of this whole project is the timing of the interviews. There is one conversation recorded explicitly on December 8th, 2025.
And for anyone who knows music history, that is the 45th anniversary of John Lennon's murder.
He sits down to talk about the decade following the Beatles, specifically on the 45th anniversary of John's death. Does the gravity of that specific date fundamentally alter the DNA of the stories he's telling?
Oh, it completely changes the DNA.
Yeah.
The human brain processes anniversary dates in a very visceral way. The body keeps the score.
Well, thanks for joining us today. Whenever you feel like knowing more about the Beatles, visit us at BeatlesRewind.com. It's the Beatles all day, every day, 8 days a week. Cass, we'll do it again tomorrow.
All right, I sure will. See you tomorrow.
Until next time, when you listen.
Your mind conducts its own symphony.